The story begins with a couple in a wedding dress and an older man are greeted by Claire, the housekeeper, and Oliver, the owner. The couple is enchanted by the beauty of the house and its large glass windows. A beautiful supper with well-trained servants is followed by a night of love. In the morning, the husband walks his young bride around the house, showcasing pricey decor, paintings, and valuable art objects. There is a luxurious wardrobe with fashionable attire, a wonderful kitchen, and lovely rooms. All doors in the story have biometric locks, including one corridor. When Elizabeth notices a glass door and asks Henry about it, he responds that it is a place she cannot access due to the several locks. Henry says that the biometric scanners are configured with the parameters of two people, including hers. The following morning, Henry departs, leaving Elizabeth feeling down on their honeymoon. She swims in the pool and explores the house, asking Claire about her time working there and shyly inquiring why a distinguished scholar like Henry chose her. Elizabeth fills her day with reading, trying on clothes, and dancing in front of the mirror. Later, she notices Claire and Oliver leaving. Struggling with insomnia, she roams the house and inadvertently finds herself at the forbidden room. Overcome by curiosity, she steps inside. A door swings open to reveal a lab-like room filled with sensors and devices. Elizabeth, startled, presses a button, and a door slides open, unveiling a glass capsule with a sleeping young woman inside, a tube in her mouth. Panic sets in, and she bolts, knocking over a table and slicing her finger on the glass. The next morning, Henry arrives, playing the piano, but notices Elizabeth's distracted demeanor and her bandaged finger. When he inquires about it, she brushes it off as clumsiness, but he sees through her lie, leaving her feeling exposed. That night, as Elizabeth feigns sleep, she hears Henry approaching the forbidden room and quietly follows him. He confronts her, accusing her of disobedience. She insists she saw nothing wrong, but he emphasizes that her disobedience is the issue. Terrified, she tries to escape, only to find all exits locked. Henry pursues her, catching her on the stairs, and violently throws her down, before striking her with a metal poker. In the next scene, Henry, Claire, and Oliver dig a grave in the yard, lowering Elizabeth's lifeless body into the earth. After the funeral, Claire suggests it's time to move on, but Henry insists it's not over. 6 weeks later, he introduces a double of Elizabeth, repeating their past interactions. He warns her to stay away from the forbidden room, and she agrees, their love rekindling as Claire observes from the shadows. That night, Elizabeth, restless, finds Claire in the kitchen. Their conversation flows, but Claire tries to issue a warning. Just then, Henry enters, taking Elizabeth to their bedroom. The next morning, he leaves, urging her to behave. Alone, she calls for Claire and Oliver, but silence answers. Bored, she tries on clothes, swims, and plays the piano. The forbidden room lures her in, and she screams upon entering. That night, a nightmare unfolds. A girl resembling her rises from a glass capsule. Henry arrives, sensing her fear. When he realizes she's disobeyed, he confronts her, choking her until she fights back and escapes. In the kitchen, she grabs knives while he prepares a tampon soaked in ether, then sits at the piano playing ominously. Elizabeth unwinds to the music, unaware of the lurking danger. As the record spins, Henry creeps closer, catching her off guard. He forces a tampon to her face, and it seems all hope is lost. In a desperate twist, Elizabeth stabs him, and they both fall, blood pooling around them. Regaining her senses, she finds Henry lifeless. She cleans the mess, wraps his body in fabric, and discreetly loads it into the elevator. After tidying herself up, she discards her wedding ring and incinerates her bloodied clothes. Calling for help, she realizes she doesn't know her address. Just then, Kain and Oliver arrive, and Elizabeth feigns normalcy. Shocked to see her unharmed, they are taken aback when she claims Henry is just resting. As Kain heads to the kitchen, she suddenly collapses from a heart attack. She grabs the phone, calling for help as the ambulance takes Kain away. Elizabeth attempts to leave, but Oliver insists he can't protect her if she steps outside. He realizes Henry is dead. Elizabeth tries to justify her actions as self-defense, and Oliver comforts her, admitting he despised Henry too and will assist in disposing of the body. He asks about her childhood, and she reveals she spent time in the hospital after losing her parents in a car crash and grew up in an orphanage. Oliver points to a nearby house, claiming it's their home. Elizabeth inquires about Claire, and Oliver discloses she's one of 6 clones of Henry's wife, number 5. Shocked, Elizabeth panics, longing to return to her honeymoon. Oliver urges her to flee, suggesting she take money from the safe. She heads to her room to gather her belongings. Oliver enters with Claire's diary, asking her to read it. As she struggles with the handwriting, he locks the doors. Confused and desperate, Elizabeth pleads to be let out, but Oliver remains firm. In despair, she starts reading Claire's diary, discovering that Claire was invited by Henry to collaborate due to her status as a renowned geneticist. Upon arriving at the scientist's home, she encountered Oliver. However, as she learned about her role, fear gripped her. She was caught in a tragic love tale, one that was baffling, distressing, and impossible. Henry shared that his wife had passed away shortly after giving birth to Oliver due to a rare disease that rapidly deteriorated her genes. Heartbroken, he cloned her cells, creating 6 replicas, but the illness emerged in them too. To preserve them, Henry constructed cryogenic chambers, placing the bodies in stasis. By the time Kain joined the project, only 4 clones remained. She began unraveling the genetic mystery of the disease, while Henry recorded messages and played music, hoping to spark memories. Yet the latest clone, Elizabeth, remembered little beyond fleeting moments, lacking a true inner life. The tension in her consciousness became overwhelming. One day she burst into the lab, fleeing in terror. The police found her and returned her to Henry's home, where Kain recognized her as her sick niece. The girl's bizarre claims were brushed off as a mental illness, leaving Elizabeth distracted from her reading. When Oliver walks in, he brings dinner and tells her to behave, but Elizabeth lashes out, demanding the door code. Oliver gives it to her, and she rushes to the lab where she finds him working on the latest clone, the 6th Elizabeth. He asks her to hold the clone's head while the 5th version supports it. Oliver then injects the new clone with a sedative. In a daze, Elizabeth starts to see the memories of her previous selves. She wakes up in a room, chained to a bed, unable to escape, and continues reading Claire's diary. Claire recalls how they kept pushing their research forward, but a week later the clone died. Kain realized that neurodegeneration had started again, and she couldn't cope with it. Henry was devastated, feeling like all his years of work had been in vain, acting like a madman. However, Claire argues that he was just being passionate, and a relationship began to blossom between them. Oliver comes back into the room, curious about what Claire wrote about him. Elizabeth tells him that Claire started a romance with Henry after the 3rd subject's death, unaware that Henry had changed the samples. This meant Claire wasn't to blame. She had actually managed to halt the disease, and the other clones were doing fine. Oliver reveals that as a child he admired Elizabeth because she was the most beautiful person he had ever seen. Back then they became friends, which upset Henry. One day Oliver witnessed Henry kissing a girl, and that night a man blinded Oliver. After sharing everything that happened, Oliver left while Elizabeth kept reading. Claire mentioned that she ended the affair herself, saying it was impossible to compete with Elizabeth. Henry talked about the pain of losing his beloved and now dreams of reliving their first wedding night. Claire discovered there were no records of Elizabeth giving birth and realized that Oliver wasn't Henry's son. He was actually a creation of Henry's, made out of fear that Elizabeth wouldn't accept his true self. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up to the sensation of scissors against her neck. Oliver demanded to know what Kain had written about him in the diary. Elizabeth confessed that Claire thought he was a clone of Henry, but that wasn't accurate since Henry had shown a birth certificate proving Oliver wasn't him. Elizabeth then asked if he loved her and invited him to get closer, removing her pants. Unable to resist, Oliver moved in and embraced her, but she suddenly threw him to the ground and choked him with a chain, demanding he give her the keys to the shackles and the real code for the door. Just then, another Elizabeth entered the room, pointing a gun at them. The two girls stared at each other, looking exactly alike. Oliver tried to persuade the new Elizabeth that the one in the room was sick and an imposter, but the 5th Elizabeth insisted that wasn't true. They were both hostages, and she just wanted to escape, following Oliver's orders. The 6th Elizabeth commands the others to lie on the ground, but the 5th Elizabeth protects Oliver. When the 6th finally pulls the trigger, she kills Oliver and injures the 5th clone. In a panic, the 5th clone tries to flee, while the 6th clone mourns over Oliver. The wounded Elizabeth escapes the house, her mind flooded with the mix of memories and visions of her clones. A gunshot echoes as the last Elizabeth takes down her double, exposing her final breath and the last vision of herself leaning in close. As morning breaks, the last clone reads Claire's diary. Henry decides to transfer all his belongings to Kain, allowing her to continue her research. He admits that he never meant to kill the one he had always wanted to bring back. It just happened. She died, and now her repeated deaths bring him joy, a secret no one else needs to know. These versions aren't truly his Elizabeth. He believes that only by destroying them can he feel their reality. Henry is determined to end this cycle. After finishing the diary, Elizabeth notices a taxi arriving at the house, and Claire steps out. They meet at the door, and Elizabeth decides to leave everything to Claire, believing she deserves it. As Elizabeth walks away, she leaves behind all the fear and confusion. Throughout her life, she dreamed of a perfect man who captured her heart and took her away from all her troubles into his hidden world. But now she finds herself unable to sleep, and the story ends here.